I mainly get my feedback from is the CIO, COO, people involved in business delivery. So these are the people at the coalface. So divisional managers, business managers, anyone who's delivering their service or a product to a customer. And we tend to have quite a few user forums where we sit down with users and ask them their view on what their challenges are with IT. And these are some of the words we normally get. And unfortunately, some of these words are used as my environment isn't agile. I've heard a lot about this cloud thing. I want to get access to information. And sometimes we have to try and set analogies to try and get from our clients what their challenge really is. And the most recent one was we were talking to an NHS hospital, and they said, look, I've got all this data everywhere, and it takes me 6 weeks to write the report that needs to be delivered at the end of every month, which we're then measured on. I said, so right, it's 2 weeks late. They said, no, it's 6 weeks after the month's ended. So the point there was, so how can they affect change? How can they try to meet their targets? How can they improve delivery if they're receiving information that's meant to assist them at the end of the calendar month, 6 weeks after that month is finished? You can't make any change. So what we eventually got down to was that effectively their data sits in these still filing cabinets. They're actually databases, but still filing cabinets all over the campus, and someone's locked it. Some of the cabinets they've lost the keys for. Some of them are sort of so rusty and jammed they can't get them open. And what we try to get them to explain to us is, well, look, if we can get a way of having a Superman type runner who can run between these filing cabinets, collect all this data for you and present it on one dashboard, is that the sort of thing you need? Because then you can get that information on a daily basis and you can make some major changes before you get to the end of the month. And I think that's pretty typical for the challenge that most users who have to make decisions face. And those decisions vary as you go through the ranks. The other one, which is quite strong, that I think James picked up on quite a bit, is devices, availability of systems, and also social networking. And we'll try and touch on that later. So what is your key focus? Now, I think when James asked the type of audience we had, I think most of you are to do with information technology. There's a few business managers, so probably quite useful, because this is the feedback I've got from effectively the business owners, the CEOs, COOs, managing partners. And the biggest challenge they've got, customer retention. I think that's a fairly obvious one. But sometimes we lose clients because we've forgotten to do something, or we've not got the right piece of information to hand to ensure that we retain that client. Competitive advantage. I think, as we go through these tough times, ensuring we've got information available to us and we're able to respond very quickly ensures we do create a competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage can be created through innovation and technology. So being more creative, giving your customers more access to your services and your products. And it's not necessarily appropriate to everyone. I think the organisations who know that interaction with their client and constant interaction, allowing them access to systems, allowing them access to data, know that they stand a better chance of retaining that client and giving that client a better service. That's where that's appropriate. And that goes right down to retail outlets. I think James touched on a hotel he was staying in, there's screens everywhere. Well, those screens in the future, as technology enhances and you can track someone's location, it's a bit like, what was the one where it looks, Minority Report, where, as you're walking past a screen, it says, hello, James, we're looking for you, you're on the run, which his name's not really James. His name's not really James, but that technology isn't so far-fetched, because if you embed an RFID tag in a mobile phone, hands up who doesn't carry a mobile phone. you all carry mobile phones. So the point here is that the technology is there. It's just the application of that technology. And the organisations that use that innovation will have the advantage. And the leap between something like Minority Report and where we are today isn't that great. It's just an application of that technology and using that technology to help us provide a better service, which is ultimately what we're looking for. Profitability is a key one, because I think what all organisations have always done, going back 300 years, 400 years, is try to get more out of fewer people. Or, some pubs we frequent try and get more water in the beer rather than beer. They're always trying to look at ways of becoming more efficient, growth through better quality, better service, and employee relations are key. So, the challenge that we often have is that we could be a great organisation, great products, great services, but the people who are interacting with our clients, if they're demotivated and not happy, they will ultimately deliver a bad service. So you've spent an absolute fortune putting this infrastructure and these solutions in place to deliver a really high quality of service, and Kevin at the end of that process decides that he wants to have a strop that day and just ruins experience for the client. And that's quite common. That ranges from call centres, retail, even in our line of work. Our highly polished sales force sometimes have a bad day. Usually when they've lost a piece of business and they get kicked around by sales managers. Right? So IT service challenges. I think that top one is quite interesting. I think I'd like to see, because we've got mainly technology-focused people here. So the IT function has become an enabler. I think that's more. That's a statement that rings true, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, than it ever has done. Does anyone disagree with that? Does anyone not believe that you're seen as a business enabler? Okay, so that's interesting. So you'll see that's true, which also means that you can also hinder business. Because, so how many times have you had a call or an email from somebody in your organisation saying, actually, you've stopped me from doing a piece of business today, or you've stopped me being productive? So I won't ask for a show of hands, because I think no one will put their hands up, but I think we all know who we are. So that's quite key. So as a function, IT becomes more of a business driver, and it's the difference between an organisation being average or great. The pressure is more focused in on the IT department, and I think that's where how we decide to provide service. And I think service is one of those things where you can actually then start talking about a service provision as a cloud service provision. Working with partners, better integrating those partners into your internal IT function to deliver a rounded service in the same way that you want some extra processing power. You've got your on-premise systems and you feed out to Azure. It's the same thought process. And I think it then moves on the concept of I have a supplier, and I think we were then called partners, to becoming an organisation that's an integral part of your support structure. And I think that's quite key going forward. It's that service providers and customers embrace the fact that actually we're probably more joined at the hip going forward than we ever have been, and we need to be to ensure that we support our business's needs. Demand for data, I think James probably did this one to death. And there's a whole presentation on this later, but no, so data and giving people access to data, I think, is more critical than ever. As anyone working in an organisation that really doesn't care about data, all they're interested is in email and Office. No? Okay. So trying to drive that data and trying to get it out of those rusty filing cabinets and getting it to the people that can make decisions and have got use for it is critical. And what we're going to touch on later on in the day is how we hope to achieve that. The other key area that I think we've all sort of neglected is compliance. Now, one of the big challenges we've had as organisations in the past, IT has not really had to worry about compliance. Certainly, if you go back 5 years, unless you work for a leading law firm, compliance wasn't really at the top of your list of things. I think most people used to wonder, well, I am a compliant individual, but that's not what they mean. Compliance is in data compliance and security. So it's become more critical now to organisations' success. So just be interested to see, so how many people have a compliance officer within your organisation? And so those who put your hands up, how many of those people have only been in the post, say, for the last 3 years? It's a recent role. Okay, so one. So the point there is not many of you put your hands up, but it's certainly something with changes in legislation and more access to data remotely is becoming more of a critical topic. And what we're going to do is try and ask the panel later on some questions around security and how they're hoping to try and address these issues. So what I've tried to do is try to distill all the bits of feedback I've had from the different clients, CEOs, into 5 top topics, a bit like James's top of the pops countdown. So what we'll do is we'll try and cover each of those. Has anyone not faced any of these challenges within your organisation? Be interested to see if anyone disagrees with that list. Okay, that's pretty good. It was all of you that I asked, by the way. So access to information in a secure way and the ability to collaborate. I think James touched on this quite heavily, and we've got some presentations later on. And bearing in mind, I'm not allowed to talk about technology or products. I've got to be careful here. The point here is that we've now, because of what we're used to at home and access to our own personal information, we sort of assume that whether we're sitting on a plane or whether we're sitting in a session like this, we need to be able to access the most critical piece of information that's going to enable us to make a decision. Now, that applies for probably 20% of the workforce that you deliver services to. But I think the 80-20 rule is quite true here, that 20% of the people within your organisations are the people that make the decisions that critically affect the direction of the business. So having that information available is going to be quite a challenge going forward. And what we hope to show you a bit later on, and we've got Windows 8 loaded on a tablet you can have a little play with later on during the breaks. And we've got some iPads that we're going to use just to demonstrate access to information. Still some work to be done to make it seamless, but it's certainly going in the right direction. So access to systems anyway, I think Steve said he's trying to get everyone out of the building so they can reduce the rent. I think the challenge that we now have, and it was interesting, we had a remote access seminar about 4 or 5 months ago, and the video is available on our website, where the head of IT from Shop Direct, now those of you who don't know who Shop Direct are probably know someone who shops. It's the online catalogue, Littlewoods and things like that. So their view was that before they went to Windows 7, I mentioned the product, before they went to the new shiny version of Windows with some Microsoft remote access tools called UAG, I'm not going to get told off now, they found that people stayed in the office maybe half an hour later than they would tend to, so their committed time, so they stay to 6 rather than 5:30. And that would be it. They'd go home, switch off, because dialing in via the VPN, trying to connect and remember passwords was so painful that once they'd left the office, it wasn't that they didn't want to do some work or they didn't need to do some work, it was just too painful. So when they went to the new shiny version of Windows and the Microsoft Remote Access tool, what they found was people were actually leaving slightly earlier. They were leaving at 5. But what they were doing is they could tell this through the reporting, they were working for an hour to an hour and a half in the evening, typically coming online about 9:30, 10, where they got away a bit early to do some stuff with the family, to go and do whatever they needed to do. And after they got all their social stuff out of the way, decided they just needed to catch up on some work. And they found that time in the evening, for the people that did connect, was probably the most productive part of their day. Because when they were looking at the stats for the remote access solution, they were quite puzzled at the volume of people that were connecting. So they did a bit of a study around it and found that people said they were actually far more productive in those hours of work than they were during the day. So I'm not quite sure. I think James's laptop works underwater, but I think... Is it?
Please don't try it.
So from a support perspective, the effect of that is it's driving 24/7 support. Now, how many of you believe your organisations don't need 24/7 support? It's interesting, no one. Now, if I asked that question 5 years ago, let me pose that now. So if I was to ask you that question 5 years ago, how many of you would have stuck your hand up? How many of you don't think your organisation needs 24/7 support? Okay, so a fair number. So you probably haven't changed what you do as a business. Your clients probably haven't changed what they need from you. All that's happened is where your users have become accustomed to using technology at home and using the new shiny versions of Windows and other productivity tools, they just want to try and extend their working day and work when they want to work rather than when you want them to work. So the emphasis that puts back on the IT function is we've now got to be prepared to stretch the working day and provide systems that we can manage and operate remotely and not have to have 20 people on call. So what we're going to try and touch on later on is look at some of the productivity tools that will help you deliver 24/7 support without necessarily having to massively increase your IT function or working. And the other option is to work with partners to deliver that. So I think the social media piece is quite an interesting one, and it's definitely a question. I know I've got two of the panel in the audience at the moment, so it's definitely a question you're going to be asked later on, is do we allow social media into business or not? Now, it's quite interesting. Some organisations have got a firm view around this, definitely not. Where others say, well, look, people are going to bring a second phone, they're going to check Facebook, they're going to check their Twitter. So what I may as well do is try and integrate it to give them one view. So it'd be quite interesting to see what our panel thinks of that and how they're embracing social media. But it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We can take one of two routes: make life very difficult for our users, or try to simplify life for our users and give them access to the tools that they want to use. The big question is, will it reduce productivity? And that's not a technology question. That's a policy and training and cultural challenge I think everyone has to face. It's allowing these tools in will affect how people work, and the question is, will it make them more or less productive? Controlling costs. I think one of the things we've seen, certainly with, I'm not allowed to mention product names again, but James mentioned it right towards the end, with the latest version of productivity tools from Microsoft, the management tools, what we've seen is a better control of devices, server technology, desktop technology, an easier way of deploying new updates and new pieces of software. And I think what that allows us to do, if you go back to the 24/7 piece, is it allows us to provide more services with what now is becoming a very valuable resource. The IT function, used to be described as sandal-wearing hippies and you slide your pizza on the door, where I think most IT functions now, some of the sort of most polished professional business-like environments, that you'll ever meet, because you guys are challenged with providing critical systems which actually make the difference with whether a business stays in business or not. You know, and I know some of our customers, if they lose access to email or they lose access to their core databases, their CRM systems, within a number of days they may go out of business. You know, and it's something that we've all got to look at and try to understand how we can provide manageable, cost-controlled solutions that allow you to do your job and allow your businesses to be productive, and touch on those other areas in the previous slides.